2 sets down, it's singles night, what me and Mrs. MYGOlf talk about, and that's basically where I fix a whole bunch of single golf clubs that have come in for some repair or another. Let's check them out. A lot of broken clubs all of a sudden. We're getting to the end of the season. Expectations are high. Performance is maybe not so much. So we've got to repair a whole bunch of broken clubs, obviously. So I was thinking, part of the box is the builds. You see how I put everything together. And we've done quite a few of them. And I thought, well, what are the biggest mistakes that club makers make? What are one of the first mistakes that hobbyists, guys that do it for a part-time gig or a full-time gig, what were the very first 3 mistakes that we all made when we first got started? This is to help you, the beginner, or help anybody to not make the mistakes that we did. So let's get started. I got to take them apart first, then we'll talk about the ELG. All right, that was pretty quick. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 irons, or 7 irons and 1 putter to put together. Now you saw me taking it apart. It was just a matter of just a fun spot to show you me taking it apart. Although there's a couple of new builds where some customers wanted an extra club of some variety, or I was catching up with another one that was behind because of supply chain. All right, so now, what is the number one biggest thing? And this is number one. Now, how did I get a hold of this? I went out to MYGOlf Spy and GolfWorks you guys have seen on the live stream. And let's just go with this for right now. This is my golf channel. It's for fittings, repairs, reviews. Also, your scores can go low. So like and subscribe if you would, okay? I do a live stream on Mondays at 5:30 Eastern Time, and we talk about the same topics. It's a live back and forth discussion, so join us if you like to do that kind of thing. So in the live stream, the forums, I put it out there. What's the 3 biggest mistakes you made? By far and away, the very first one was the E, epoxy. Not knowing about epoxy, using too much epoxy, everything that we want to know about epoxy. It seemed to be kind of a secret or something along the lines. I'm not sure why. So, okay, we're going to talk about epoxies, right? So golf epoxy is a 2-part idea. You got 1 part hardener, 1 part epoxy. Put them together, and that's what makes the glue, okay? And there are some that are 50-50. This is like one part, one part. There are some that are two part, one part. All right, it just depends on the manufacturer. Now, I have used for years, I have used GolfWorks epoxy with no issues. All right, in fact, in very few failures, I've had a few failures, but it's in the like 1 percentile range. Okay, well, what happened is that we started shipping off clubs that were going way away from us, and I needed something that was more substantial, one that got to me less than 1%. So I have converted over to a 3M epoxy. Now you can't see what this one looks like, but right here, 3M, okay? Now 3M makes two different kinds of epoxies. There's the DP810 and the DP420, both in black. The DP810 is a very fast cure epoxy, where the DP810 is specifically made for golf clubs. If you go to their website, it shows a golf club. All right, this is a 2-to-1. This is a 1-to-1. So it just depending on what you need. If you need it fast, and the 810 is what's used on tour. Okay, so if the tour is using it, very reliable stuff. All right, so let's talk about epoxies. Epoxies come in a lot of different shapes and sizes and cure times. So when I mean shapes and sizes, I mean cure times, gel times. So you can get a cure time or a usable time in 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, half a day, 24 hours. It's all that just based on your needs. Okay. However, those typically come with limitations because there's a brittle portion of it. How easy is it to break the bond and its shear points, okay? And typically the faster it goes, the lower the shear point becomes, unless you're starting to use the very expensive stuff, which is from 3M. So you got to be careful of that as well. I would recommend, particularly if you're starting out, is go with the 24-hour epoxy. The 24-hour epoxy has a huge working time that allows you to put the epoxy on, get the ferrule set, get everything wiped off, do a bunch of clubs at the same time, and allows you to make mistakes and still not be penalized because all of a sudden it's starting to gel. So use the longer cure times, the longer setting times, in order for you to get used to it. And then when you get, a rhythm going on how you make your golf clubs, then you can start shortening it if you desire. But the 24-hour has always been the best for me. Now, I will give you a pro tip, that out in here I have I call it my Easy Bake Oven. And basically what it is, it's a locker. And it's a locker that's been insulated and has 200-watt light bulbs in it. You plug it in, it gets to a certain temperature, you get your club set up with that 24-hour, you put it into the cabinet, you bring it out in about 2 hours, and voila, Bob's your uncle, and things ready to rock and roll. All right, and what we'll see is if you look at assembly techniques for big club manufacturers or people that are doing it really fast, they have what are called cure stations. And these cure stations have they're like clips, and the club sits in it like that. And then what it does is it heats it up and then cools it down. And all of a sudden, it's like almost instantaneous. It goes in about a minute or two later, you're pulling it out, and it's workable, ready to go, put it in a box, and you're off. All right, so there's all these different applications for all these different situations and all these different epoxies. You have to pick what's best for you. All right, so I wanted to talk about the epoxy and how it's got. Now, the next thing about epoxy is epoxy is applied in thin layers, not big goops, and we'll talk about that while I'm putting it together. So if you have a lot of wobble, chances are your shaft and your hosel are not matching up. You need to make sure that they're good to go. The other part is that the tip needs to be abraded because the epoxy needs a rough surface to adhere to. And your hosel needs to be cleaned out because if it's adhering to the dirt or the particulate or the graphite or the steel bits or the leftover glue and it breaks off, then it broke off with the dirt and doesn't stay with the hosel. So it's imperative that the hosel is clean, the tips are abraded, and the area you're working out is really good to go. All right, so I'm all set up. I'll show you how it goes. We're going to use the 420. And I'm probably going to get all of them before it starts to set, so you'll see what I mean. And so let's go to the bench. Okay, so what we have is a little, I just cut up a box, and I cut up a bunch of them in order to have something to mix the glue on. What I've seen in the past is you get like a plastic plate, something like this, something that will bend but doesn't break, and you can put it on there, and when the epoxy dries, you just bust the or bend the plastic, the epoxy comes up and you throw it away. A very good volume reduction idea. All right, another thing is if you really, I've seen you get like an awl, I've seen this, where you get something that looks like this, maybe a little bit longer, as a stirring stick, and you just wipe it off. Again, another huge volume reduction, and that's a really good idea. However, what we're going to be using is this, so I can show you. And this is my 420, a little bit, so you can gauge how much you want to pull out or push out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stir this guy for about 40 seconds. Okay, the idea of stirring it is we've got to ensure that it's mixed up. At this point, I'm putting in what's called quick center. Black Beauty, sandblasting beads. They don't want to be real big, and you don't need a whole bunch. And then we're going to mix that in. Okay, so a little bit over a minute. We got it all sitting there, and there we go. All right, so we got to get rocking and rolling because this thing's going to cure. All right, so the first thing you want to do is I want to apply just a little bit, and then I want to put my ferrule on. So basically I'm gluing the ferrule on. You've seen those ones where the ferrule starts sliding? This is a preventative measure. Then we're going to push this down. All right, so now we know that we've got it seated. You don't really need to, there we go, you don't need to get a whole lot on there. What I've done is I've come about a third of the way down to half of the way down, and I get in there and I start spinning it around, and you'll see a little bit out at the top, and I just like scooping that up at the end. This is the whole idea here is that you want an even distribution of the glue, not in here and on here. So once you get it all done, look around, make sure it's all good. I want just a little bit more. Okay. And then we align the shaft the way we want it. And then we seat it. All right, last thing we're going to do is take some paper towels that we've cut into 2x2 squares, and then you're going to wipe off any excess. There's normally going to be some. The idea is to minimize that so it doesn't want to keep coming out. All right. So there you go. And it's nice and clean, and that's what you want. Now, what happens when you use too much? If you use too much, when these things start mixing together, it creates an exothermic reaction. Exothermic reactions create heat. When you create heat, it wants to find a way to escape. And what happens is that the epoxy tries to escape with it. And that's what gives you the glue boogers on the end. And that's what we're trying to prevent. So the idea is to get you a good thin layer. Get you a good thin layer on the tip and in the hosel. And when you get too much, you can see stuff like that happening. Now, how do you get rid of it? Well, the easy way is just to pull it off like that. There we go. Line this guy up the way we want. And we got to make sure we really clean this guy off. And see the difference of how much it comes off of there when you use a little too much? Got her clean, check the alignment. And then the last part I do is I put a piece of tape on here and that's to prevent ferrule creep. Again, the exothermic reaction, we don't want it moving up, and we set it. Okay, now another one is when you use, it can be a problem when you use ferrules that have collars. Again, we want to make sure that that we're gluing the ferrule. Give me a moment to push it down. There we go. Now collars present a whole nother issue. So what you have, you have the shoulder that's inside the head, and this have to marry up. That's a really good collecting station for epoxy. So we're going to get a little bit more epoxy, and as you can see, again, the same amount. And nice, it's all looking black on the inside, and it's all looking covered. Now, as you can see, there's a whole lot collecting at this particular area. And what can happen is if your ferrule is not very solid or seated very well, that epoxy can move it off, and that's what we're trying to stay away from. So when you seat it, what we're looking, you can hear the sound, and you can tell it goes from a tinging sound to a solid sound. And that's what we're ensuring that we have it seated. All right, so now we have a good connection between the two. We put the tape on it, and then the tape prevents the ferrule from being pushed up, and we're good to go. Okay, here's another one that's this is a different setup in that this is a ping, and it's set up very much in the same way when you've seen PXGs, in that the top is very, very wide, and it uses a special ferrule to take up that space to hold it in there and make it a little more solid. So I've already started this one. I want to make sure here, that this is really all the way down. I got a little bit to go. All right, I had to push the collar, push the ferrule onto this one using a vise. And just what I was telling you, see, when you pull it around, there's still a space there. So I've got to go try and punch this down a little bit. There. Persistence is a virtue. I got it. And you see how I know I'm getting it? Because I keep wiping off more and more glue. All right, we got that one. Graphite. Graphite's no different than steel in the way of assembly, except for you don't want to cut into the graphite too deep, and you really, really want to make sure the shoulders are good so they don't create a shear point either. And you see how it's starting to grab the shaft as it goes away? That means it's starting to get to the end of its useful life. So I got one more club. If we get it together, we'll get it. Hear that different change in sound? And that time I had a little bit more on it. There we go. Good there. Putters. Now, there has been another technique that we haven't talked about where you would take it and you would just put it into the hosel and then turn the shaft around it. I don't subscribe to that except for when dealing with putters. It just seems to work better in a putter. And so that's what we're going to do. Because when you put it in the hosel, it's particularly an iron or driver, and you put it and you fill it, and what will happen is that people will just fill it up. And when that happens, all you're doing is putting glue into the tip of the shaft. And you really don't need that. It's a waste of epoxy, a waste of time. So apply it. So we got them all set up. Let me turn you around and we'll talk a little bit more. Okay, so that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 4, 6, yeah, 7 clubs in that short period of time. And then 7 clubs, that glue started acting like it was getting ready to gel. And that's about the end of where you want to go. Now this is to have, you can go a little bit further, but if it starts getting stringy, then you really don't want to use it, because I really worry about it attaching. All right, you're pretty much at the end of its useful life. Set it to the side, put some more on, keep going. That's the reason on the 810 is that you set over smaller amounts. I can do about 3 clubs before it starts doing that, and it's over. My max is 6, and that was when I was totally 100% ready to go. And that bam, 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 bam. I did it in basically the same time I did 3. Okay, so that's number 1. That's the first mistake. The E is the epoxy. So hopefully you learned a little bit of something about that. In review, use the epoxy that fits your situation. If you're just getting started, 24-hour cure, it would be the best way to go. It allows you plenty of time to work it over, get it in the position that you want, because you may not be sure of yourself. Gets it in there, easy to clean up, and it holds. It does. It has a very good high shear strength. It's very impact resistant, so it's good stuff. And then you can make sure your tip is abraded, and make sure your hosel is clean. Make sure that you stir it up very, very well. I like using quick center as just another way of centering it in there. Is it a requirement? No, I just like doing it. Okay, and then hold that stuff over to the side, because we're going to talk about that going into the second mistake. So I need those to dry, and then we'll go into our second mistake. So I will see you in the morning. All right, so now it's the next day, and the clubs are all dried. We ensured that we cleaned off all the epoxy, and they turned out really, really well. I finished all the ferrules. They're all nice and shined up. There's a nice even transition from the hosel to the ferrule. It's nice and smooth. You have a very nice taper that is what you're used to today. They're nice and shined up, and they're ready to go. So now the next thing is the L, and that's measuring length. I put the same question on Golf WRX, and the response has been amazing. And they have some additional ideas or mistakes that have been made in the past, of which all of a sudden is going to make a second video. So there's going to be these 3 mistakes, and then there's going to be at least another 3 mistakes. So stay with me. And if you guys are watching and you guys have made some mistakes and you're just looking to, figure out how other people do it, put those in the show notes as well. And that way we can help other folks getting started from really making that costly error. All right. So we appreciate that, along with the subscribe and hitting the update button or the bell button. So measuring for length, measuring for length. Now, on the broken clubs that you saw and may be seeing right now, the measuring for length kind of goes out the door to an extent, because I have the whole club here with me. What makes this problematic is that not every manufacturer has the same amount of cap. All right, so if I show you all these different ones, right, all these different ones, these all have different caps. I mean, even this one has a hole in to hold a disc, and so that's going to have a different cap than its predecessor. Then you have another softer grip, and they have different caps on them, but does it stop here or does it go into there? Some people know, some people don't. Then you have this nice rubber grip, and does it stop at this ring, or right up in there? And then one of the more populars, 2 different models from the same manufacturer. So it's kind of difficult to know what that length is supposed to be. So what do? Well, you can do a couple of things. Number one, you can go to the website and look up the spec and see if it matches, right? That's what we tend to do. It's hard to find some of the older clubs now, so it's really good that I have two pieces. Then what I do is I mark to the crown and then I measure to see how close I am to a standard number, all right, which will take us to the measuring. We'll be here in a minute. And that's what helps me make that particular length. Now, measuring for length by USGA rules is when the club is in a horizontal position and it sets like this. And what they want is that the measuring platen that it sits on from here out to here, this area is 60 degrees. All right, so if I go and I get to 60, I'll try that one. Now we have to go the other way, sorry. We have to go, it'll be here, and that's 90, so it'll be here, and that'll have to be 60 degrees. So we go back, and so that this angle here is 60, meaning that this angle here is 120 if you have that platened. All right, so there's other philosophies out there in measuring length in that from the playing position, meaning that you're going to set it and the middle of the sole is where it's going to set. And we'll just use this again. And you get up there in the middle of it, and then you measure it from there in that way that it sets, and then you measure it from where it touches, intersects the ground right here, all the way to where you want to go, and then that's where you cut it. That is the more popular of the way to do things. Now, the way I measure it is in the playing position. The difference there, it's what's universal to you and what you have to do for repairing. If you're going to be building a club that is going to be either really close to the lower limit of 18 inches or really high to the limit of 48 inches, which I believe it's come down, but the website says 48 still, then I would measure using the 60 so that we don't have any errors. However, anything in between, I'm going to use the playing position because I don't want to build an illegal club for somebody that might be in competition. Okay, so there's that. So I've measured, as you can see, I've put all the broken clubs together and I've found the length that I need and I've marked them off. However, I got two brand new ones. So we're going to go over and show you how I'm going to do that for getting those lengths accomplished. Now, one more thing. If you guys, the measurement of the length is from that intersection at 60 degrees all the way to the top of the grip. Top of the grip is also a discussion. Where's the top of the grip? Right? Is it right here? Where if you put that grip on and it doesn't stay flat, it can have a tendency to crown. So is that the new top of the grip? Or is it the shoulder? Right? Every bit of training that I've ever had in my entire life is that's the top of the grip, the very beginning of the shoulder. For that guy, right here for this one. And this one, where's the top of the grip for that guy? Right? Is it right here or is it right there? So there's always going to be a different philosophy and to do that. The real thing that you got to know here is that you do it the same for you, right? You do it the same for you. Because Lord knows none of the other OEMs are looking at each other and saying how to do it. And if you measure, you'll see some that are made on what would be the 1/2 inch or the 1/4 inch. And what does that mean? It means that your 5-iron traditional length is 38 inches. You measure it with the grip, it becomes 38.5, 38.25. That means that they cut the raw length to 38 and put the grip on. If it's truly 38, then they made room for that grip cap, which is somewhere between 1/4 inch or so, and then that's the 1/4 or 3/4 inch. So it's just on your particular preference when you're putting these together. What I do is I cut the raw length to the length that I want, and then we put the grip on regardless of the cap, because that's the length that I want you to play to. So let's go measure and we'll show you. Okay, so we're going to show you the playing position, and then we'll show you what it looks like when it's at the 60-degree position. So the playing position can be used where you get the score lines, and this is a nice little tool to get me into the score lines. It makes it sitting into the playing position, and I mark it at the number that I need, which is 35. All right, so now what I'm going to do is, regardless of this guy, because we don't care anymore, we're going to go to 120 degrees, which is right there, past 90, all right? And we're going to go like this, and we're going to go like that. So that's the 60 degree, the other side, and we just need to touch it, which we are, and then I'll mark it with a silver Sharpie and show you what the difference is. So when we put this back into the playing position, this is 35 right here, and this is the black mark, and that was the first one that I was showing you. All right, now if I go and I take it apart, and we'll do it again on this side, and I go to the 120, i.e. 60, right? And let me set this thing up again. There we go. And we get the intersection where it sits down in there. There we go. And that's 35. So literally no change. Okay, so we cleared a little bit of that up, right? So I measured not only the other wedge, but there's another, and if you can see that, they're right on top of each other as well. So that's measuring for length. Now, we measure it for raw and we put the grip on. That's what I do here. Some others will take into account the grip cap and make them shorter. Even OEMs do that. That's purely a personal preference. Now, the way the rules are set, the way the USJ would say is it's to the top of the grip. All right, and that's just measuring it. That doesn't come into account with the fitting and all the other things. We're just talking about measuring for length. All right, and that's how I would do it with this. Now, again, you can use a ruler like we were talking about, and I have one of those, and you could put it on, you would put it on the ground. You would put it on the ground here, and then wherever this ruler intersected the ground, which would be something along like that, right? And then in the playing position, not this way, not this way, then you would go up to the end and then find your length, and then you would cut it off. Now, this is using the 48-inch ruler is actually a pretty good start. Why did I leave it? Well, because when you have it in front of you and you lean over, you have the tendency to push down, and that makes the toe go up, even if you're looking at it and you're doing it. Now, measuring, don't get confused with the idea of measuring versus the fitting result. All right. So if you get in there and I use an OEM and they say it's a 38-inch club, but when I measure it, it's 38 1/4 inches. That means that they're cutting to the raw length and putting on the cup, or putting on the grip. Now there will be some that will come out right on the number, and that means that they've cut it off. That's just their preference, all right? And the idea of knowing how to measure, that's what this was all about. All right, so that's measuring for length. There's other kinds of measurements to be done: swing weight, total weights, lofts and lies, you name it, flex, MOI, tons and tons of other parameters, but measuring for length was one of them that was specifically called out. So that's what we're talking about. All right, so I'm going to cut these and we're going to get to the G. So give me another moment. The final and the third mistake is in gripping. Now, gripping, the mistake was not using enough solvent, but we're going to take that a step further and talk about how it sticks, and then how you can use the solvent to your advantage. So first things first is that I have every one of these laid out with all the grips that we're going to use. And so the question would be well, how do I know where to start and stop the tape? Well, I start at the lines at the cap and the lines at the end of the grip, and I make a line. And that tells me where I need to be. This is going to be the first one, so I'm going to leave it here. And we're going to go through all of these, and we're going to do the same thing for all of them. and make sure that we get down there. And the idea here is we have to have the end of the shaft closed. Whether you use a folding technique or a spinning and cut it off, either way is good. The idea is not to go beyond that line. Alright, what I'm using here is 2-inch tape. In the day, 3/4 inch tape was used, and it was made in a spiral fashion. That Ping still does. And for those guys that are very good with it, they can do that. We're going to do this, and we're going to just bring it and pull it tight. Alrighty, so we've got all the tape on. The idea of the 2-inch tape was to get it around without any wrinkles. I'm down to my last 3 grips. This is the time to talk about use of solvent. We've just had a whole bunch of customers come in. So we've got the tape on. The idea here is you've got to get it, and you got to get it moving, and you got to get it sliding on, and you want to use solvent. Now, the old golden rule is you can never use enough. So if you get it to where it pops out, and you get it all in the grip, all covered with the solvent, and then you get the tape all covered up, and you let it go, and you just make sure it's all covered up. Alright, you put your finger over the weep hole, the back, get it going, slide it on, align it up. I like to seat it just to make sure that it stays on there, and then I check it in the playing position one final time, and then I wipe it off with the solvent so it takes any goo that might be on there. Alright, so let's talk about now we're going to talk about now how much do you truly need? Well, if you fill it to the top, that's the maximum, but can you get away with just a little bit? You saw that was a little bit, and you can feel it about halfway up in there. Can you do that? Well, look at that. You can. You can do that. All right, so can you use too little? Well, obviously that's a yes. What you want to do, best rule of thumb that I've used is you get it so that you feel like you're filling it up halfway. Fill it up about halfway at a minimum, and then you got to make sure that your tape is covered. If you don't think your tape is covered, then use extra. So if you just went down this way and you didn't think it was covered, then get you some of this and just throw it on there as extra, and you would go through it there. Alright, so covering the weep hole, and you just don't stop when you push it on. You just keep going and you don't stop, because the idea is that you want to feel it seating when you get down to the end, and that way your grip is on there. Now the next question typically that comes with this is, well, how long before I can play it? If you're in the heat of the summer, it may just be a few hours. If you're in the dead of winter, it may be a half a day. So this is a solvent. Solvents tend to evaporate. They tend to evaporate when they're warmer. They don't evaporate when they're cool. So you really have to be very judgmental about how you tell somebody to do that. Now the other thing that we can do is that you can use a heat gun if you want to speed up the process. You get the heat gun, run it up and down there, give it about a good solid minutes worth of heat, and got to keep it moving because this thing will melt it. Keep it moving, and then that way that'll speed up the heating process. So that's putting on the grip with the right amount of solvent. Alright, so that's the 3 mistakes club makers make. The first biggest ones, right? Number 1, the use of epoxy. Now what we really are talking about is how much, making sure that it's stirred up, using the quick center if necessary, making sure that the hosels and the tips are prepared properly, meaning tips and hosels are clean and they've been abraded so that the epoxy will grab. Making sure that the epoxy is well stirred. Making sure that you use enough to coat the inside. If you use too much, wipe it off because it'll be a pain in order to get it off. That's epoxy. Measuring for length. Measuring for length is subjective in that how you want to do it. You use the 60 degree in the upward position. Most of them are laid flat, but it's the same thing turned sideways. or you use it in the playing position. They're off by just little bits, as we saw. And then determining on how you, the club maker, want to measure that, or if you're doing a repair, how the OEM did it so that you can mimic that length. And then if you're measuring for length for somebody, say in a blueprint, where you measure to the top of the cap of the grip, right? The top, if you press it on and it's curved, that's not going to do you any good. You want to make it so that it's a nice flat grip, and you measure to the crown or right to the edge of that, and that will get you where you need to go, and that is length. The last bit is gripping and the use of solvent. Again, the golden rule is you can never use too much solvent. You can drown it, and then all of a sudden your hands are all gooey and the outside's all gooey, but you fill it to the top, make sure that it's coated, make sure that the tape, which has been applied with no wrinkles, and not beyond the end of the grip. That's the big key, not beyond the end of the grip. And so you can slide it on, work with it, seat it, wipe it down, heat it if you want, or just set it off to the side and let it dry naturally. All right, then now, can you use a little bit less than that? Well, sure, you just saw me do it. I filled about halfway, and the idea is to make sure that you've coated the inside of the grip and that the tape is completely 100% covered with the solvent. Now, if you don't think you got enough, squirt some on. And go all the way to the end. When you push on the grip, all the way to the end, don't stop, feel the seating, and then push it down. And that way, when you get done, check to make sure that all the grips, you haven't grabbed it and stretched it, that you've just pushed it on, and then that way the lengths are pretty good. All right, so that's the 3, right? Now, again, like I told you, I put this out on other forums, so it's been Golf Spy, Golf Works, and our live streams, and I'm starting to get a lot more answers, enough to do this again. So like, subscribe, put some questions in the show notes if you have other mistakes, and we can maybe include it into the other ones, and then watch for the other videos. Join us on the live streams on Mondays at 17:30 or 5:30 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll just have a great discussion about golf equipment, golf fittings, and golf repairs. And as always, guys and gals, let's see your scores go low.